Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about something Padre Pio said that sounds absolutely impossible until you see the evidence. He claimed that a single Mass, just one, could rescue 1,000 souls from purgatory. Not over time, not eventually, but in that moment. Most people sit through Mass every week without realizing they're witnessing the most powerful event in the universe. But Padre Pio didn't just believe this. He saw it. He watched souls being freed in real time during the consecration, rising like sparks through darkness. He saw what happens in the invisible world when the priest lifts the host, and what he described changed the way everyone around him understood what Mass actually is. This isn't about ritual or tradition. This is about rescue. Padre Pio once said something that stopped people in their tracks. He said, "If you knew what happens at a single Mass, you would die of joy. Not happiness, not peace. Joy so overwhelming it would be too much for the human heart to bear." He wasn't speaking poetically. He meant it literally, because he saw what no one else could see. Throughout his life, Padre Pio's hands bled from the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. Those wounds bled constantly, but witnesses noticed something strange. During Mass, the bleeding intensified. His hands would shake as he held the host, blood soaking through the bandages, staining the altar linens. The friars asked him why it happened that way. Padre Pio answered quietly, "Because Calvary is happening again." Not a memory of Calvary, not a symbolic representation. Calvary itself, the sacrifice of Christ, made present in that moment. He explained that Mass is not a prayer offered for the dead. It is the moment when heaven and earth touch, when Christ's sacrifice on the cross becomes accessible to every soul who ever lived. The grace is released at Calvary, infinite, eternal, inexhaustible, pour out again every time a priest consecrates the bread and wine. Padre Pio said the souls in purgatory know this. They press against the veil separating them from the altar, waiting for that moment when the host is lifted and heaven opens. He described it like people waiting outside a locked door, knowing relief is just on the other side. When the consecration happens, the door swings open. Not for everyone, not always, but for those ready to receive it. Padre Pio said the souls don't just benefit when someone offers Mass specifically for them. The Mass itself is enough. The presence of Christ is enough. And the souls wait for it, like the dying wait for water. One morning in the sacristy, just before Mass, a friar found Padre Pio standing completely still near the window. His face was pale, his eyes distant, fixed on something the friar couldn't see. The friar touched his shoulder gently and asked, "Father, are you all right?" Padre Pio blinked slowly, as if returning from somewhere far away. He turned to the friar and whispered, "They are already here. So many." The friar looked around the empty sacristy, confused. "Who, Father?" "The souls," Padre Pio said quietly, "from purgatory. They know Mass is about to begin, and they have come to wait." He explained that he could see them gathered near the altar, pressing close, their faces turned toward the tabernacle with an expression the friar would never forget. Hope mixed with longing. Padre Pio described them as people waiting for rain after months of drought. They weren't afraid. They weren't in despair. They were waiting because they knew what was coming. He said they looked at him not with demands, but with quiet expectation, the way a child looks at a parent who promised to return. Some had been waiting a long time. Others had just arrived. But all of them understood that Mass was the moment when relief could come, when the infinite mercy of Calvary would flow toward them, like water breaking through a dam. The friar asked carefully, "Father, does the Mass help them even if no one offers it specifically for them?" Padre Pio nodded. "The Mass is not a private gift. It is an open door, and when heaven opens, grace pours out on whoever is ready to receive it." Padre Pio explained it this way. The Mass generates infinite graces because it is the sacrifice of Christ made present again. That sacrifice is infinite in value. It cannot be measured, cannot be exhausted, cannot run out. Every Mass releases the same power that flowed from the cross on Calvary. But someone has to distribute those graces, and that someone is Mary. He said Mary stands at the altar during every consecration, receiving the graces like bread in her hands, and then she decides where they are needed most. The souls in purgatory cannot earn relief for themselves. They can only wait and receive. So Mary looks into that place of longing and chooses who is ready, who has been purified enough to enter the light. There's a story that shows how this works. A woman came to Padre Pio in confession, and she seemed distracted, worried about something unrelated to her sins. Padre Pio noticed and asked her what was troubling her. She said she had attended Mass that morning, but spent the entire time thinking about her family's problems. She felt guilty for not paying attention, for not praying properly. Padre Pio smiled gently, something he rarely did in the confessional. He said, "Do not worry, your uncle thanks you." The woman stared at him, confused. "My uncle?" "He entered heaven this morning," Padre Pio said quietly, "because you were at Mass." She had an uncle who had died years earlier. She hadn't thought about him in months, maybe longer. She certainly hadn't remembered him during Mass that morning. But Padre Pio told her the soul of her uncle had appeared to him just after the consecration, filled with gratitude, and said he had been freed at that very moment. Not because she intended to help him, not because she prayed specifically for him, simply because she was present at Mass, and heaven applied the grace where it was needed most. Padre Pio told her, "Intention is beautiful, but it is not required. The Mass itself releases the power. Mary receives it and distributes it. Your presence was enough." There's another testimony that shows the Mass doesn't just help the dead. It reaches the living, even those who seem completely unreachable. A family came to Padre Pio desperate and grieving. Their father had rejected God for over 30 years. He refused confession, refused the sacraments, refused even to speak about faith. Now he was dying, and the doctors said he had only days left. The family begged Padre Pio to help, but the old man was too weak to travel and too angry to ask for a priest. Padre Pio told them, "Bring him to Mass." The family looked at each other, skeptical. The man hadn't attended Mass in decades. He would never agree. But Padre Pio insisted. "Tell him it is for the family. Tell him you need him there. Do not mention God. Just bring him." Somehow they convinced him. The old man came, sitting in the back of the church, arms crossed, face hard. He looked like he was enduring a punishment. During the first half of the Mass, nothing changed. He sat motionless, staring at the floor, visibly annoyed. But then the consecration began. The priest lifted the host, and the church fell silent. And in that silence, something broke. The old man's face changed. His shoulders began to shake. Tears started streaming down his cheeks, and he bent forward, covering his face with his hands. His family stared, stunned. They had not seen him cry in years. When Mass ended, he stood up slowly and walked straight to the confessional. He asked for a priest immediately. After more than 3 decades of refusal, he reconciled with God. He received the sacraments. 2 days later, he died in complete peace. Padre Pio said afterward, "It was not my words. It was not his family's pleading. It was the Mass." He explained that the graces released at the consecration had broken through a fortress of bitterness that nothing else could penetrate. The Mass, he said, is like a battering ram against the hardness of the human heart. No soul is too far gone, no resistance too strong. When Christ becomes present, walls fall. But the question the friars kept asking was this: what happens at the exact moment of consecration? What does it look like when souls are freed? During one Mass, the answer became visible. Padre Pio was celebrating in the small friary chapel, surrounded by a handful of friars. The moment he elevated the host, he stopped moving, completely still, his eyes fixed upward, his hands trembling slightly, holding the consecrated bread as if it weighed nothing and everything at once. Tears began streaming down his face. Not slow tears of quiet emotion, but a sudden flood, as if something overwhelming had broken through. The friars noticed, but didn't move. They had learned not to interrupt him during these moments. They watched as he stood, frozen, his lips moving silently, his gaze locked on something none of them could see. After Mass, they gathered around him carefully. One of the friars asked, "Father, what did you see?" Padre Pio took a long breath, wiped his face, and said quietly, "I saw them rising. Hundreds, maybe more." He described it like watching lights appear in darkness, one after another, lifting upward through something that felt like mist or shadow. The souls moved toward Christ the instant the host was elevated, drawn to him like iron to a magnet. Some rose quickly, almost leaping. Others moved slowly, as if they were learning to stand after a long illness. But all of them turned their faces upward, and Padre Pio said their expressions were the same. Relief so profound, it looked like they were breathing for the first time. He explained, "The moment he becomes present, purgatory opens. Not for everyone, but for those ready to receive him." The friars asked if this happened at every Mass. Padre Pio shook his head. "Not always, but it happens. Christ's presence creates a doorway, and Mary guides the souls through. Some are freed immediately, others receive relief, but are not yet ready to enter heaven. But all of them feel his closeness, and that alone is mercy." The friars pressed him further. They asked if he always saw this many souls, and if not, what made the difference. Padre Pio answered carefully. He said, "Not every Mass, but some, especially when the Mass is offered with intention for the dead." He explained that once, during a Requiem Mass, he saw over 1,000 souls freed at the same moment. The friars stared at him, unsure if they had heard correctly. 1,000. Padre Pio nodded but clarified. He said it wasn't an exact count. Trying to count them, he said, was like trying to count stars appearing at dusk. You see them emerging one after another, but the numbers blur together because there are simply too many. What determines how many are freed? Padre Pio said it depends on several things. The holiness of the priest matters. The intention of the faithful matters. But most of all, it depends on the needs of the souls and the will of God. Some Masses release a few, others release hundreds, and in rare moments, when heaven decides, the floodgates open. He described Mary's role during the consecration. He said she stands at the altar, invisible to human eyes, but absolutely present. She holds the graces of the Mass like a mother holds bread, and then she looks into purgatory and calls souls by name. She knows who is ready. She knows who has been purified enough to step into the light, and when she calls them, they respond immediately. Padre Pio said, "She chooses who is ready. She knows." He described what the freed souls look like in that moment. Their faces change. The weight they've been carrying, the sorrow of separation from God, lifts suddenly, and they become almost weightless. Light appears in their eyes, a reflection of the glory they're about to enter. They don't speak, but their gratitude is visible in every movement. They turn their faces upward, and then they rise. Padre Pio believed that the Mass is Mary's favorite moment to act, because during the consecration, Christ gives her everything. All the graces of Calvary pass through her hands, and she distributes them with a mother's care. Padre Pio often taught something that confused people at first, but brought deep comfort once they understood it. He said the Mass exists outside of time. God sees all time at once, past, present, future, and the graces of the Mass are not locked into the moment they are celebrated. They reach backward and forward across eternity. A man once came to Padre Pio troubled about his father, who had died decades earlier. He asked, "Father, is it too late to help him now?" Padre Pio shook his head and said, "There is no too late with God." He explained that a Mass offered today can free a soul who died years ago. Heaven doesn't work in sequence the way we experience time. The graces released during the consecration become available to God for the exact moment He chooses to apply them. So a Mass you attend this week may be the very grace that freed your grandfather in 1920 or your grandmother in 1945. The prayer reaches them not when you offer it, but when they needed it most. This teaching brought comfort to many who grieved loved ones. Padre Pio told them that the Masses they attended now could still help relatives who died long before they were born. And it worked the other way too. The Masses you attend during your life become available for your own family after you die. The graces don't disappear. They remain, stored in God's eternal present, ready to be given when needed. But there was another part of this teaching that Padre Pio emphasized strongly. He said, "The souls you help become your advocates. When a soul enters heaven because of a Mass you attended or offered, that soul does not forget. They become intercessors for you and your family, praying constantly on your behalf." He told one woman grieving her child, "If your child is in heaven, he is already praying for you. He helps you because you helped him." The Mass creates eternal bonds between the living and the dead, connections that last forever. Every soul freed by the Mass becomes part of an invisible family, praying for those still on earth. Padre Pio said, "You never attend Mass alone. Every soul you have ever helped is praying with you." Toward the end of his life, Padre Pio's body began to fail. His hands, scarred and bleeding for 50 years, could barely hold anything. His legs weakened. Standing through an entire Mass became almost impossible. The friars began supporting him physically at the altar, holding him upright during the consecration, steadying his hands when he lifted the host. But even in pain, even when he could barely speak, he never missed offering Mass if he had the strength. The friars would help him to the altar every morning, and he would celebrate slowly, carefully, his face filled with the same reverence he had shown as a young priest. On September 22, 1968, Padre Pio celebrated his last Mass. His hands shook so badly the friars had to help him hold the chalice. His voice was barely a whisper, but he made it through the entire liturgy, and when the consecration came, he stood as straight as he could, lifted the host with trembling hands, and his eyes filled with tears one last time. After Mass, he was taken back to his cell. One of the friars stayed with him, and Padre Pio whispered something the friar never forgot. He said, "I saw so many waiting. I'm glad I could help them one last time." Less than 24 hours later, he died. Before he passed, Padre Pio left one final instruction to his spiritual children. He told them, "Never miss Mass. You don't know who is waiting." He said it simply, without drama, without trying to convince anyone. Just a quiet statement from a man who had seen the invisible world and knew what was at stake. Padre Pio believed that the Mass was the greatest power ever given to humanity. One Mass, one sacrifice made present, one doorway opened between heaven and earth. And through that doorway, souls are freed, hearts are changed, and eternity is decided. One Mass can rescue 1,000 souls.